Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here, especially to speak among so many who are making such a contribution to our field. I want to talk to you about a legacy leader. I want to talk to you about Jim McGrane. Jim McGrane we've known for over 2 decades, and we've had the privilege of working with him during that period of time. He's one of the most extraordinary leaders that we've worked with in our 30-year practice. When I first met Jim, I was struck by the fact that he'd spent more face time with senior thought leaders in our field than I had. He literally has been his entire career a student of how to become a more effective leader and how to create or design organizations for high performance. I'm going to begin at the end of this story. Jim is no longer with us. Jim passed almost 2 years ago. And so this is a tribute to Jim McGrane. Jim is one of what I call legacy leaders. He's the kind of leader who somehow manages to take his unique capability, skills, talents, purpose, passion, and channel it toward service, contribution, and making a difference in every venue of his life. I think this kind of leadership is spiritual boot camp. I think it's boot camp because it's hard. I think it's spiritual because to become this kind of leader requires transformation. I think of the transformative process. I'm having trouble with my clicker here. There we go. I think of the transformative process as managing 2 currents or navigating 2 currents. The first is the ascending current. Great leaders orient on their highest aspirations. They somehow discern and give focus to the driving purpose or passion that seems to want to come through their life. Right? We all know this. Jim was one of these kind of leaders. Warren Bennis wrote a book called On Becoming a Leader, where he interviewed over 150 leaders at the tops of their professions, and one of the principal themes was the pursuit of purpose. He said leaders that he interviewed did not set out to become leaders per se. They followed an urge that they could not be about, and that led them into leadership. Stephen Covey, 7 Habits, says begin at the end. Begin with the end in mind. Write your mission statement. Write your legacy statement. Then be about creating your life and your leadership as an expression of that. Mary Oliver, in a wonderful poem called A Summer's Day, describes this transformative pull of purpose very poignantly. She says, "Who made the world? Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who's flung herself out of the grass, who's eating sugar out of my hands, who's gazing around with her enormous, complicated eyes. Now she lifts her forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away." I don't know what prayer is, but I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down into the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And Jim was the kind of leader who got onto this question and created his leadership accordingly. And that's the ascending current. The descending current is we have to face ourselves. In other words, we have to go into or descend into the parts of ourselves which are too small, too scared, too cautious, careful, that are not up for that much greatness, that are in a play not to lose game, if you will. The parts of ourselves that are arrogant or autocratic or overly aggressive. right? I have those parts. Believe me. We all do. And so if we can meet them, greet them, become students of those parts of ourselves, we can then transform them and become a more powerful vessel or vehicle for the purpose that seems to want to come through our lives. And that's legacy leadership, and that's the kind of leader that Jim was. So let's get on with the story. When we got involved with Jim in his most recent business venture, he was the CEO of a commercial finance company, equipment leasing commercial finance company. And in the 3 years since startup, from 2004 to 7, he built that company into $700 million in assets under management. It was the fastest growing company in the industry and already in the top 100 companies in that industry. An amazing leader. And it's no surprise that if you know our 360 profile, the leadership circle, that his profile looks like this. Now, you probably don't because, so I'm going to give you a thumbnail sketch so that you understand these pictures, because we're going to show you quite a few of them. So we lay results out in a circle. And the top half of the circle are what we would call creative competencies, the kind of key competencies. There's 18 of them that are highly correlated to leadership effectiveness and business results. Right? So you want to see good, strong scores in the top half. Bottom half are reactive tendencies. These are default settings we go to under stress. And to the extent that we go to them too strongly and too often, they become liabilities. And so they're inversely correlated with effectiveness and business results. So you want to see low scores in the bottom half of the profile. So if you're following this, and the way we draw it, things radiate from center, and the green are 360 rater scores. So you want to see high scores in the top half and low scores in the bottom half that look like this picture. Got it? Right, okay. So this is actually the optimal leader profile. Here's how we got it. We asked 50,000 managers around the world to describe optimal leadership. And here's the question we gave them. What's the kind of leadership that if it existed in your organization would allow it to thrive in its current marketplace and into the future? This is the picture they gave us. And they give us this consistently. Now, here's Jim's profile. So you can see that Jim is approximating this optimal leader. We also calculate a leadership quotient score. So leadership quotient's very simple. It's creative, the top half, divided by reactive, the bottom half. So Jim's average score in the top half is at the 93rd percentile, meaning his scores in the top half are higher than 93% of our norm base. His scores in the bottom half are at the 46th percentile, and therefore if you divide 93 by 46, you get a leadership quotient of 2. Clear enough? All right, that's all you need to know. So Jim's got a leadership quotient of 2. We think 1 is about when you start to really be a competitive advantage in your leadership. So below 1, leadership may be costly or competitive disadvantage, and above 1, your leadership is a competitive advantage. And so Jim at 2 is a serious contender. And his track record shows it. So here's what happened. We got involved with Jim. We did some work with them. They went off to kind of create their business. And we all know what happened in 2008 and 9. The financial markets melted down. This created huge dislocation in the commercial finance industry, which also created opportunity. And in order to capitalize on that opportunity, Jim turned to the capital markets and pulled off the largest equity raise in that industry's history. $2 billion assets were raised, and a new company came into being, and Jim's company was assumed into that company. What he thought was a marriage made in heaven turned out not to be. I don't want to get into the particulars of that, but let's just say that Jim and his team were severely constrained by the harsh, aggressive culture that came into being there. And Jim, however, was on the senior leadership team, so he has a part in this, and we'll get into that, right? So what happened was they drove that business into the ground. Portfolio assets fell from a peak of $800 million down to $500 million, and new business origination fell from a high of $400 million down to $1.35 million. That's a plummet, really, in new business. And so when this happened, and as the recession deepened, the venture capital company pulls the plug on the business, and in about 2010, Jim finds himself going out of business and selling off assets. Then an amazing thing happened. Everbank comes in to buy the assets. And when they met Jim and they saw his leadership and they met the team and saw what he put together and the vision that they had, they did a smart thing. They didn't buy the assets, they bought the company. And they funded it, and then they did another smart thing. They gave Jim the latitude to lead it. And so, late 2010, Jim's got a new lease on life, back in business again, and shortly thereafter, he calls us. Well, the first thing we do is another round of Leadership Circle profiles. Now, here's the results of the business that we found when we come in, all right? So, if you look at the orange there, this is assets under management. You can see peaking at 800 million down to 500 million. And in blue, new business development, peaking at 4, dropping as low as 1.35 million. That's the business situation. So here's what we found when we did the 360s. So here's Jim's profile in 2007. You've already seen this one. Here's his profile. This is going to be a little tricky with this clicker. Here's his profile in 11. You see the backward shift? 7, 11. This is like your optometrist. Better, worse, you know. But notice the shift in the lower right, right? Your lower right. This is the controlling section. So he goes much more controlling, much more arrogant, autocratic from what he was. You see the shift? All right. If you put them side by side, you can see that his leadership quotient went from 2 to 1. So Jim's gone from a serious competitor player to neutral in his leadership. Well, this was a wake-up call for Jim. Now, one of Jim's principles that he lived by was trust dangerously. Love that. Trust dangerously. So listen to this. So we sent him his results. 2 days later, my partner Bill goes in to meet with him. He'd already had 40 meetings. 25 meetings with 40 managers in his organization. And all he did was walk in there and say, tell me what happened. Put on both profiles. 7, 11, said, tell me what happened to me and what do I need to do about it. How many leaders do you know that care that much or would do that? Remarkable. And he got an earload. And when we met with him, the coaching session was pretty much over. Before it started, we walked in, he said, I'm the problem. I got it. At a time when my company most needed me to be creative, I went reactive. This is Ralph Stayers, Johnsonville Sausage CEO. Terrible truth number 1, I'm the problem. If anything is going to change around here, I need to do most of the changing. Pretty much what he said to us. That wasn't all. When Jim saw the aggregate profiles from the people below him, he had some more learnings. So this is the senior team that reports to Jim in 7. This is their profile. In 11, looked like that. 7, come on. 11, see the shift? And if you look at the lower left now, you see a big shift in what we call complying. So as Jim got more controlling, they got more passive, complying, playing not to lose. And so if I put the profiles together side by side, they went from a leadership quotient of 0.86 to 0.76. So now the whole leadership team is playing less than 1. For the first time, we got profiles on the levels 3 and 4 below them. So this is their profile. They're at a leadership quotient of 0.5. So the entire leadership system in this organization is now playing at a competitive disadvantage. And here's what happened with business results. We saw that, right? And if you put the leadership quotient scores underneath it, Jim's in orange, the senior team's in blue, and the next 2 layers in green there, you can see a pretty parallel downward trend in leadership effectiveness outcomes. Well, when Jim saw this picture, he had some more learnings. He said, I've assumed that my effectiveness was enough. Now, there's an arrogant statement for you. I haven't invested in collective effectiveness of our leadership. If I want to scale this business, I need to scale leadership. That's my primary job. Huge aha. And so he set about then working the business transformation with a major focus on how do I develop the capacity of the people beneath me to develop the capacity of the organization. And we went on to do some work with him, which we call the leadership system. And Jim was an early adopter for us in this leadership system, helping us figure it out and learn it. And I won't get into it, but let's just say it's a long-term, systemic approach to the development of the entire leadership system of an organization. And Jim helped us figure this out. So we worked with Jim for another couple of years, and here's what happened. Here's Jim's profile in 11. Here it is in 13. 11, 13. Now look at the lower right. Look what happens with his controlling score. It shrinks dramatically, and everything else in the top hand blooms. He's become now a real mentor and developer of his people, and so, oops, I'm going the wrong way. And so if I put those two side by side, you got a leadership quotient that goes from 1 back to 2. Jim's back. Now let's look what happened to the level below him. So this is direct reports to Jim. 11. 13. 11. 13. Look at their complying score in the lower left go way in. So they're showing up. And if I put them side by side, you got a leadership quotient that went from 0.76 to 1.6, double. Jim's score doubled, this score doubled. Let's look at what happened at the next layer. So this was their first in 11. Here we are, right? Can't make it shift, so I'll just go on. If I put them side by side, you can see the difference, 0.5 to 1, so they've doubled too. So now the entire leadership system is playing at 1 or higher. Here's what happened with business results. Assets under management in orange go from 500 million to 2 billion, quadrupling. New business generation goes from a low of 1.35 million to 1.5 billion. That's more than tenfold. And if we put the leadership quotient scores underneath it, you can see the relationship. This is what Jim knew. This is what he believed in. This is what he stood for. The collective effectiveness of us as a leadership organization drives the business. And he led it vulnerably, and he led it from the top. In fact, one of our last meetings with Jim, we got the team together. We put up their leadership circle profiles all around the room. We put newsprint all around the room. We had an all-day conversation about the relationship between how they were showing up individually and collectively as leaders and the impact in the business and vice versa. It was an amazingly open, honest, direct, vulnerable, high learning day. This is the kind of leader Jim was. Trust dangerously. Of course, they were looking essentially at this picture. So, the story goes on. We wanted to do a video. Jim wanted to cut us a video for a conference we were doing to talk about what had happened, and on the day of the video, on the day of the shoot, he canceled. And he wasn't feeling well. A few weeks later, he goes into the hospital and he never comes out. Huge vacuum, obviously, in his family, community, organization, but also huge legacy. Huge. He left a legacy in his church, his community, his family. In his business, when they cleaned out his office, we were told by one of the senior managers afterwards, he says, I didn't want anything from Jim's office except one thing. I wanted his original leadership circle profile because I wanted to have that in my office as an example of the kind of leader that I aspire to be. That team that Jim put together and the principles by which they learn to operate has now created a $10 million company. Jim leaves a huge legacy in the industry. He was the industry president of the association. And in his honor, they did, I think, maybe a first of its kind. It's unprecedented. They conducted an entire industry-wide study on the relationship between effectiveness in leadership and business performance. And they found some pretty interesting results. Those businesses that were in the upper half in the industry in terms of effective leadership cultures had 10 times the performance of those in the bottom half. So Jim's legacy is now being taught into that entire industry. He leaves his legacy around the world because he helped us pioneer the leadership system which we're using with leaders all over the world. Rumi has this incredible line in a poem. He says, "If you've opened your love to the great love, you are helping people you have never known and may never see. Is what I say true? Say yes quickly." And this is Jim, because his work is all around the world. It's in our book, and it's influencing leaders all over the world, and his legacy sits with you today. Jim is the kind of leader that our profession, HR, L&OD, strives to support, strives to develop. And I think if Jim were here today, he would say to you, with Mary Oliver, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And then build your life according to that necessity." That's legacy leadership. That was Jim McGrane. I want to just close with a very short tribute to a fantastic guy, Jim McGrane. All right, thank you. It's been a great pleasure to be with you. Appreciate it.